Y'all know God's good all the time. Without God, I'll be nothing. What this is, a 750? Haha. Get your numbers right, man. Man, God is good, man. V12.
Oh no. Oh, I know that ain't the V12. I just know that ain't the V12. Skirt. This is my 2005 760Li, and the detailed story as to how this particular car got into my garage is quite a long one, so buckle up. Going way back to my late high school days, I dreamed of having one of the elusive 760Lis. In my late days of high school, when I realized that cars was the direction my life was going to be headed in, I began browsing this little app known as Kijiji. And looking to the stars as one young high school student does, I was looking for a 745 because that's what all the coolest rappers were talking about. However, while I was looking at the 750s as they were a far more reliable option than the 745s were, I did stumble upon something known as a 760. This 760 in particular was the one that I stumbled upon. This car sat on Kijiji for around 3 years, and it never sold, and I never had any clear explanation as to exactly why it hadn't sold. Theory was that it was because the price was too high, the price never budged in the entire 3 years this car sat on Kijiji, or because they were just known to have troublesome engines and nobody wanted to tackle the project. But I was sad one day when I seen that the car had actually been removed from Kijiji because I had been following this car for so long that it was almost sad to see it go. But that was not the last hurrah of this 7 Series. This car had not found its home yet because once again this car would return to Kijiji with the exact same mileage but asking a slightly lower price. At this point I had purchased a garage and already had 2 vehicles requiring constant maintenance, so I didn't need another car. But with each going day, this car... Sorry, we'll get to that. With each passing day, this car got cheaper and cheaper. In day increments, it was dropping by thousands of dollars. And eventually it reached a price where I couldn't resist and I had to inquire about it. The Kijiji seller was very difficult to work with, unfortunately. It would not only reply to messages every couple days. The seller would only agree to meet between Monday and Friday, only within working hours and not on the weekends, which for anyone who works Monday to Friday within working hours, it's hard to find anybody that is capable of driving me to Airdrie, Alberta to pick up the vehicle and come back. One day prior to when I was supposed to go out there to look at the vehicle, the ad was removed from Facebook Marketplace and all of my messages with the person had been deleted. This was a telltale sign that the car was gone and I would never see it again. However, the Kijiji ad, which was a mirrored ad of the Facebook Marketplace ad, was still up, but I assume they had just forgot they even had that up to begin with. But I took a shot, messaged them. After giving up hope, a week later, the seller would hit me back and say, yes, the car is still available. But for anyone who has experience buying vehicles will know that that means someone else backed out of the deal, which can raise red flags that you should be aware of. The fact that the ad from Facebook Marketplace was not reposted, being that the car was still available, was a red flag that this may have been a scam, so I had to proceed with caution. I asked the seller for the VIN. The seller would not give me the VIN. This is also a little strange, but maybe the seller considers that private information. I disagree because it's written right on the hood of the car. The seller would then go dry a day before I was supposed to actually go look at it. The Kijiji ad, by the way, did have a phone number on it, but the phone number would send you directly to voicemail. There's the voicemail for a small company that I'm not familiar with that had nothing to do with the purchase and selling of vehicles. But also on the ad was the Kijiji quick contact button. That phone, anytime you call it, would bring you up to just the main companies, like a voice navigating menu thing, which I didn't bother messing around with, but in this time I decided to punch through each of the options until eventually it led me to, would you like to speak to the manager? And I said yes. The manager was aware of the car being sold. The manager was able to get me in contact with someone who was far better to deal with than the person I had previously been dealing with when coming to purchase this car. When we went to see the car, we found that the entire car was covered in a blanket of dust. This window was rolled halfway down in the Kijiji ads. When I seen the vehicle, the window was rolled down to the exact same height, meaning that the window had been rolled down for probably multiple months. The interior still reflects this, as it is very dirty in here. The body was also in notably questionable condition, as you may have already noticed. Numbers are missing there. This wheel has received some significant curbing. The BMW badge was there before I left Airdrie, but now it no longer identifies as a BMW, I suppose. There's significant scratch in this part right here. The skirt on this side appears to have suffered some significant damage. The trunk lid of this vehicle has seen better days as well. Multiple dents around this general area here, badges worn out, bunch of sticker gunk and various stuff there. Looks like someone keyed this car with a crayon or something like that. I'm not sure what to make of it for that damage. Scrapes along almost the entirety of the bumper in multiple places. Dents and scratches all along the rear trunk lid. And I don't know if you can see it, but there's slight hail damage to the roof. When test driving this vehicle, I found that it drove all right. Engine was running a little bit rough, but it had been sitting for a number of years. While test driving this vehicle, I received the VIN and gave it to my mother, who was on standby, who ran a Carfax. I'm gonna have a seat while I run you through the Carfax, because the story gets even longer from here. The Carfax indicated that the car had been built in Germany in 2005 before being sold in Florida for probably a sum of $130,000 or something around there. It was auctioned at low mileage to Illinois before eventually being imported to Manitoba, Canada. This is where the car would spend the vast majority of its life, and in Manitoba is where most of the scary things happened to this car. There are at least 5 separate accidents recorded on the Carfax while this car was in Manitoba, only one of which was actually reported to the insurance, and that's the first one, probably because the car was still worth a lot of money at that time. Each of the incidents required around $2,000 worth of repairs. That being said, the car is in pretty rough shape as is, so they obviously didn't fix everything, so I can't imagine what else has been missed. The car would then go yet again to an auction, but this time would be listed as structurally damaged. I'm assuming the car did not sell at that auction, but then was auctioned again at this exact same mileage, where the car was sold and shipped to Airdrie, Alberta, where it would only receive around 3,000 kilometers on the road before it was then put on Kijiji, where some broke high school student in Edmonton was watching it, where it would sit for 3 years without selling before selling it to some idiot who came and bought it from Edmonton. As for the cost of the vehicle, it was originally listed at a price of around $14,000, and that's the price that it sat at for the 3 years that it was on being sold in Airdrie. When the car re-emerged on Facebook, the price was $9,000, which is significantly more appetizing, but then the next day after that, it was listed at $8,000, $7,000 the next day, down to $6,500 the next day, and the day after that, it was $6,300. And that was the price that I couldn't resist, and that's when I inquired. The reason the car wouldn't sell is obviously because of the horrific Carfax information, but in combination with that, it's also the fact that these engines are plagued with a number of issues, most of which common to the V8 models. The V8s and the V12s are very similar in design. They don't have the valve stem seal problems that the V8s have, which was the biggest problem with the V8s. They do have problems with the coolant transfer pipe, they have problems with the alternator bracket leaking oil, but the biggest and most commonly known problem with the 760s is the high pressure fuel pumps. These high pressure fuel pumps will fail. You used to be able to get a replacement from Bosch on Rock Auto, and it cost $3,500 a piece, and there's 2 of them, making the cost to replace them around $7,000. Rock Auto no longer stocks them, and the price is no longer listed. If you were to go to FCP Euro looking to buy brand new fuel pumps, the price is currently $14,000 for the left hand side and $16,000 for the right hand side, currently on sale for $2,700, which is a steal, I might add. Regardless of how bad the price is to begin with, it's hard to complain about anything that's $13,000 off. But for a car that the average price is going for about $10,000, this makes these cars a complete write-off. And that's why the 7 Series has long been forgotten. Hoovie's garage owned one, his suffered this fate, and his is now in a junkyard somewhere. He didn't even resell it. However, there are solutions to this problem. Dated back about 10 years ago, the discovery was made that the failure in the high pressure fuel pumps is just because of the small synthetic diaphragms that are inside the fuel pumps, 2 of them. So the solution was available. People would buy little squares of this synthetic material, they'd put their old diaphragms on top and they'd cut them to size and replace them this way. However, I read somewhere that this was about 70% effective. Oddly specific number. Not sure how they came up with that, but point is, odds aren't good, and also in the future you may have a failure too because you're building these diaphragms yourself. However, a new day is upon us. As of somewhat relatively recently, there are rebuild kits that are being produced now. And these rebuild kits will come with all of the seals to rebuild the entire pump rather than just the diaphragms. These parts are expensive, but they're significantly less than $14,000, so you could do this job a couple times over before you actually warrant replacing the entire fuel pump, which, just to point out, you can't help but wonder how the Car Wizard or the Car Ninja, I don't remember who was doing the repair, how they didn't know that this technology was available. Part of me believes Hoovie may have just thrown the vehicle away because it creates shock value, BMW 7 Series written off, loss of value, this, that, right? Like, that's just my own personal grime. I do love Hoovie's videos, I love the Car Wizard's videos, I love the Car Ninja's videos, they all make great videos. But I digress. I've watched these 760Lis floating around the Alberta area for a long time, and even sometimes all of Canada. And I can tell you that there is at least 2 or 3 760Lis in Alberta. There is at least 1 in Lloydminster, Saskatchewan, and there is at least 2 in Ontario. Most of which of the ones I've seen have been very cheap and people have been trying to get rid of them. A lot of them do have higher mileage, which is nice as well to think. I will mention one in particular though, the one in Lloydminster, Saskatchewan. I came very close to buying this vehicle. It had about 190,000 kilometers on it, I believe, but it had fuel in the engine oil. I did a good amount of studying trying to figure out exactly all the things that can cause that. I don't remember all the research I did back then, so I'm gonna just throw the information on the screen. When I do the editing, I'll put it all in. The main one that stuck out, of course, is the high pressure fuel pump. The high pressure fuel pump has engine oil on the bottom side and fuel on the top, and there's an O-ring that separates the two of these. This was the only logical thing that made sense with that particular car that I was looking at. However, at this time, the brand new technology with the rebuild kits had just recently come out, and I did find one video where someone is rebuilding these pumps and does say they've done it a couple times, and they point out that the lower O-ring, they have seen them fail before. Nowhere else on the internet have I seen the information that this lower O-ring has the failure. Most people on the internet will say that diaphragms are the only part that needs to be changed in these fuel pumps. Aside from that, they're actually a pretty reliable unit, so nobody rebuilds the bottom ends of these, and therefore nobody has information of this particular failure. So I hummed and hawed about it. I think at the time I had purchased another vehicle. I was financially not in a good position to buy another vehicle, and unfortunately I had to pass on it. But about a year later, this vehicle would also re-emerge on Facebook, and it was listed as running good. And in the list of recent repairs that had happened to this vehicle, rebuilding of the high pressure fuel pumps was on that list. So without even having seen the car, I troubleshot it correctly. I'd just like to point that out. At the time it had re-emerged the second time, I was also not in a position to buy a vehicle, unfortunately, so I had to pass on that one as well, and that one was actually hard to pass on. However, after seeing this car re-emerge on the internet, I knew of the previous failure. I knew that the fuel had diluted the engine oil, and the overall condition of the lower end of the engine, the upper end of the engine, and the Vanos and the Valvetronic, all of it had been lubricated with diluted engine oil. And the guy had actually told me in order to keep the engine oil viscosity higher, he had been putting thickening agent into the oil to keep the viscosity up. These are all things you don't want in your engine. So as a result, I decided it was better to not buy this vehicle, regardless of the fact that the price had actually become $500 lower than the original asking price, and the fuel pumps had been replaced. So had I bought it, I would have had to buy it, fix the fuel pumps myself, pay for that, and in the end, someone else did it and charged less money for the car in the end. Why do I mention this? One, because if you have that symptom where you have fuel in your engine oil, that is probably the cause. But two is me knowing that this is a problem. When I first went to see the car, the first thing I did was I pulled the engine oil dipstick and I held a lighter to it, and it didn't burn, which told me that this engine, despite long cranks and a lot of high pressure fuel pump related symptoms, did not have this issue, which is why I felt it was a healthy candidate for our garage. But it wasn't on my first trip to Calgary that I actually picked up this vehicle. While the Carfax information was a huge red flag, I was still not ready to let this vehicle go just yet. The seller was willing to take it to an auto shop to have an inspection done at my cost. So I returned from Airdrie without the car, had an extensive talk with my insurance where I confirmed that the vehicle was not written off, went to a registry to confirm that the car had received an out-of-province inspection, organized the seller to bring the vehicle to a place that I paid in advance, received the inspection results, which is to be expected of a BMW of this age. Around 6 or 7 things to note on the inspection list, one of which being that the steering wheel was slightly off-centered and that the vehicle was pulling to the right. I didn't realize this when I was driving it. The day that I went out there was the day that there was 40km/h winds coming from the left, making the pull to the right seem like it was just due to the wind. Despite the fines of the inspection, I still agreed to buy the vehicle. And now that we've gone through the entire in-depth story of how this car came to be in my garage, let's hear it in all its glory. Although it may not be apparently obvious in the video, because that's one of the better starts I've had with this thing. This thing runs like shit, and I could already hear you saying it. Gats, you mostly responsible yet commonly common sense devoid deviant you. This car looks like absolute shit and has a lengthy Carfax history to back that, and barely runs. Why would you buy this? Well, my astutely accurate friend, that's because this 440 horsepower piece of shit only has 130,000 kilometers on it. Standing before you in all its brokenness is the beautiful 6-liter BMW N73 V12. When I picked up this car, the entire engine bay was covered in a blanket of dust full of leaves in the gutters and looked like it had been sitting for 9 years, which it had. After giving the car a good bath and giving a thorough engine detailing, I have to say myself that this engine looks pretty damn good. The car had almost every code known to man on the OBD2 scanner, which indicated a dying battery. The battery was said to be brand new on this car though. After extensively driving the car in multiple occasions, I assumed the alternator should have had no problem charging the battery. However, the code still kept coming up every time this thing would have a long start or fail to start. I pulled the battery out, charged it up, reconditioned it, load tested it, and the battery passed. After putting the battery back in the car, I found that it actually started significantly better just having the additional power to the starter motor. After giving the battery a good charge, all but a short list of 3 codes were remaining on this car, which for a 7 Series of this year is incredibly good.
But what else did we get for $6,000? 15-way adjustable seats, 4-way climate control, a fridge, beautiful wood trim on the interior which goes all around, and even on the back port where the seatbelt goes through the wood trim to get to the internal mechanisms behind it. 760 exclusive staggered wheels, V12 light up door badges, and soft closed doors. There's a fridge, an exceptional amount of legroom in a long wheelbase vehicle, and there's even a button to get yourself even more legroom and piss off the person in front of you. Beautifully stitched Alcantara headliner, oddly over-engineered vanity mirror which allows you to pop it out like that and rotate it to whatever angle you like. Electric sunshades for all of the rear windows, including the rear one. This one is broken. First generation iDrive, which is as bad as everybody says. However, it's the only vehicle I have that actually has an infotainment system, so I can't really complain about it. It's better than anything else I have. What I am very happy about though is the fact that it has these 2 buttons here. This one's not very useful. This is a quick access function which only allows you to pick from a various group of things that I don't really care about, so I've never used it. But this button allows you to go back to the main menu with 1 push, which the very first examples of the E65 did not have, so that is very nice to have. It's kind of like a mid-facelift. Oh, there's also a fridge between the rear seats here.
And those who haven't guessed it or are unfamiliar with these vehicles, my suspicion is the long crank in this vehicle is related to the diaphragms in the high pressure fuel pumps. So without further ado, I say we dive into the diagnosis of the high pressure fuel pumps, which is the reason most people probably clicked onto this video to begin with. This is your high pressure fuel pump for the right bank. This is your high pressure fuel pump for the left bank. And just beneath this Dorito shaped head is the diaphragm that is a common failure point for these BMWs. And in the many years I've spent trying to acquire one of these cars, I had to continuously go searching for one particular video, which is very hard to find on YouTube for some reason, but I've since found it again. Basically involves pulling these hoses off of these 2 solenoid valves here, and if there's fuel inside the line, you can determine that your diaphragms have failed. In the comments, someone asks if this guy can confirm that this is a 100% guaranteed way to determine the fuel pumps are failing. He replies, yes it is. But fuel pump parts can be very expensive, so I wasn't willing to throw in the towel yet without doing some more troubleshooting. Finding any information as to how to fix this particular engine is about as easy as I thought it would be. It's not. Only 330 of these cars were produced in the United States, meaning that basically nobody has ever worked on them. There is information available within the forums, but not enough. A lot of how I'm going to have to troubleshoot this car is based around just looking at parts diagrams, because there's very, very little service literature actually available to those who aren't working at BMW. I was able to find the course overview for the N73 engine, which is probably a training course given to people that were working within the BMW dealership at the time. One thing I will add is if your engine is running and starting worse than mine is, the first thing you should do as a troubleshooting step, if you have or know someone who has a very good OBD2 scanner that's capable of reading live data, I took a reading of the fuel pressure that the engine was creating. It seemed to be okay when the engine was running, but when the engine is shut down or the starter is running, it does not actually take a reading of the fuel pressure in the rail. But I can see that it is slightly low compared to the spec, which is the higher number that you should be looking at. I did see someone in the forums who had tested their fuel pressure in a similar way, where they claimed that they had one pump that was failing and the pressure was low, and the other pump was okay. I, however, find this a little bit interesting. When you look at the breakdowns in the Bosch training course, you can see that both fuel rails for both banks are joined together, so they should be showing the exact same pressure. So I'm wondering if this person's mistaken somehow, I'm not sure. But today we'll see if we can find a way to distinguish which pump is failing between the left and the right bank. This training course, however, doesn't cover any of the ventilation system for the fuel system, so for that we're just as out of luck. But I will present to you the best that I can come up with for how this system works. Under this Dorito-shaped head is where the diaphragm is housed. The hose coming off of it solely acts for the purpose of allowing the diaphragm that moves up and down to displace the air. The line then tees off to this line, which wraps around the back side of the engine, to this line, which goes to the sister diaphragm. The vent line then tees off to this intersection here, where this hose here goes up and around to this steel line, which goes fuck knows where. Before continuing to this valve junction, this valve that BMW has cleverly titled solenoid valve, which couldn't be less descriptive in determining what the valve does if they tried. This line here, however, goes down to of the fuel system itself and is titled a leakage line. On the other side of the valve though, it comes to this Y intersection here, where this side goes once again fuck knows where, which this line here goes and Ys off to both of these valves here, one going to one intake manifold and one going underneath to the other intake manifold there. What do we make of all this? I don't really know. Fact of the matter is I have fuel in this line here. I will not remove it to show you, but I'll show you a picture that proves that yes, there was fuel in this vent line. My question is there more than one reason why fuel could be in these lines? My prediction is the first steel line that goes fuck knows where is probably going to the charcoal canister at the rear of the car, and the second line coming back might be the return from the charcoal canister. As to why they have it assembled like this, no idea. My prediction is that this giant mess of valves and hoses and things that all looks very improvised is probably a purge valve that's been disassembled into a million pieces solely so they could accommodate the fact that they have high pressure fuel pumps with diaphragms that they're plumbing into the system. That being said, I don't know if there's any other reason why there should be fuel at this here. The fact that one of these lines is probably coming from the fuel tank vent line tells me that there is more than one place that fuel vapors may be entering the system. Because of that, to eliminate variables, we're going to remove the vent lines from the diaphragms themselves, and hopefully the vacuum leak that this causes isn't enough that it's going to cause any issues. Before I put a tool anywhere in this general vicinity, one thing I'd like to mention is that all of this looks very expensive. Any job like this could get very expensive very fast. What's very interesting to me right off the bat is that I have two different sizes of worm gears on my hoses. Don't know if that's intentional. One side is a 5mm, the other side is a 1/4 inch, which actually appears to be loose, which is a good indicator that this side has been tampered with, which is not great. Because my exhaust manifold is directly beneath the fuel pump, I'm going to take as much precautions as I can to not spill fuel on it. Before I pull that off, just by squeezing the line, I can see there's a lot of fuel coming out of this line. I hope I've collected as much of this fuel that's going to come out of there, because the remainder of the spilled fuel will become a fire hazard. Here I've borrowed my dad's box of large various hoses. I'm going to attempt to install one of these. Too small, should have measured before I cut. So it should work. I'm going to borrow this hose clamp. I'm going to burn my car to the ground. Red Solo cup, I fill you up. But hopefully not, because that would indicate my fuel pumps are failing. Don't do that, please. I've also been lent this set of contraptions, which is supposedly for capping off vacuum ports. And I thought they were supposed to go over it, but I doubt we're gonna have one big enough to go over that, unfortunately. I may just run it with a vacuum leak. This BMW barely runs if you have the oil cap off though, so I'm not sure how well this will run. Same idea, much more room to work on this side. Decent amount of fuel, but not as much as on the other side. Okay, no idea if this will even run or what will happen if it does run. But right off the bat, it appears faulty contamination control measures has resulted in me installing a hose that had already been used with oil in it. Gross. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen here, but I'm going to run this very briefly in case we have to defuse a fire situation. Our makeshift fire extinguisher here, which my 7th grade science class told me won't actually work if you have a petroleum-based fire, but it's the best we're gonna get. We'll replace the fuel-soaked paper towel. Replace it with dry paper towel. And I'll start by running it brief enough that the exhaust won't be hot enough to actually burn the fuel. Here goes nothing. Oh. Fascinating. I say we do it again. Surprised this thing even runs that well with 2 vacuum lines off. Oh. It would appear that my seal here is not holding because I did see fuel dropping onto the rail of the exhaust manifold. And I think that's because this hose didn't want to go all the way on for some reason. On the other side it did, this side it did not. Trying to get gravity to assist the fuel in emptying out of the line there. It appears some of the fuel made it to the ground. I think this test did give us most of the answers we need to know. For the sake of being thorough though, I'd like to get this fuel line better on. This is unfortunately where I need to interrupt the video to let you know that some of the footage that I've recorded unfortunately went missing. I don't know how, because the next footage you're about to see, I do have that recording. It's unfortunate because I was really excited about how this video had played out up until this point. Unfortunately, all the need to know information was captured in the footage that we do have still, so I'm very happy about that, but I still owe you an explanation as to the results of our troubleshooting. The last bit of footage that you saw was me attempting to correct the fact that I had fuel hitting the ground. I assumed it was coming from the hose that I had installed on the diaphragm side. I was actually mistaken. The fuel was coming from the hose going to the diaphragm. And the reason fuel was coming out of that line, I have to bounce back to what I was mentioning before about the leakage line. What that leakage line is a case drain for both of the pumps. Pumps will always have a small amount of internal leakage. It's both inevitable and beneficial at the same time. Fuel that leaks past the internal components of the pumps is used to lubricate it anywhere they can in a fuel pump system. In this particular fuel system, everything that's on the lower side of the pump, it's driven by the camshaft, so everything on the lower side is lubricated by engine oil. Engine oil has good lubricity, fuel does not, but you can't get oil into the upper portions of it, so the internal leakage is relied on to lubricate the upper side of the pump. That leakage line ties in with the same hoses that go to the top of the diaphragms. Therefore, with that line removed, I didn't realize it, but as it was running, there was fuel coming out of that line and dripping to the ground below. As soon as I made this realization, I just put another plastic cup beneath it. But what does this mean for troubleshooting our system? Well, this means that there's always going to be fuel coming out of your leakage line, and it's tapped directly into the top of both diaphragms, meaning there will always be fuel on top of both diaphragms. That being said, the only way to effectively troubleshoot it is to do what I did and remove the hoses and run separate hoses on top to isolate the possibility that the fuel on top of the diaphragms is coming from the leakage line. Let's talk about our results though. As you saw in the footage, a little bit of fuel did come out of both. A little bit more came out of the right hand bank, which is bank 1. After running the engine for a decent amount of time, holding it at higher RPM range, revving the throttle, stabbing the throttle, I couldn't get any significant amount of fuel to come out of either of the diaphragms. I even set up my camera so I could see if anything was happening. If I can find that footage, I'll include it. While I was revving it though, I did see a little bit of fuel spitting out of the bank 1. However, because there is fuel trapped on top of that diaphragm, as the diaphragm's going up and down, it's just spitting the fuel. But the fuel isn't coming from the diaphragm, it's just trapped sitting on top of the diaphragm, so. Okay, so it's the following day. I've done some more reading and I think I've got a better understanding of exactly what we were looking at yesterday. In the Bosch training course, you'll see here, I found this picture, which depicts how the system works, but doesn't look anything like the actual system. Turns out our mysterious solenoid valve actually does have a name. This is what we call the pressure damper valve, which I like better than solenoid valve. These Dorito-shaped things on top of the fuel pumps, they call pressure attenuators or damper chambers. And through this system that's teed off, this hose here, which we previously assessed was the leakage line, goes through this valve, which is normally open when de-energized. This leakage line performs the function of allowing internal leakage from the pumps, which is used for lubrication purposes, to come through this valve here, which is normally open, and allows any fuel that would be coming from either the diaphragms or from the leakage line to return through this line to tank. So everything north of this valve here should never actually reach the ventilation system. Know this because someone on one of the forums actually had experience with this valve here, and they said this should be normally closed, which now I've found that the research actually backs it. But they basically said that one way you can test this valve is by removing this hose and seeing if there's any fuel inside of it. I did that yesterday. I guarantee you this line is completely dry. However, as you've seen in pictures, and I took another picture since then, there was still fuel at the bottom of this line here. This line here should be coming from our charcoal canisters. That being said, when I took this line off here, it was also fairly dry in there. So how did fuel end up in these two little valves right here? No idea.
Something else I'd like to touch on quickly is the video on YouTube that I referenced earlier. In this video, he pulls the plastic hoses off the solenoid valves that deliver evaporative emissions to the intake manifold, and he said that if you have any fuel on those, it'll indicate that your fuel pumps are failing. Now, I have some problems with this theory. The testing that we just conducted proves that there's always going to be fuel in those lines regardless of whether or not your diaphragms have failed or not. Yes, there will probably be more fuel if your diaphragms are failing, but from forums on the internet, people say that one of the symptoms when your diaphragms are very failed is that you will actually get fuel going all the way through those lines, and the fuel will actually go through the solenoid valves and into your intake manifold. The symptoms you'll get before this is obviously you're going to have low fuel pressure because it's all going to be dumping through your diaphragms. There's a number of codes you can get when your fuel pumps are at this level of failure, and the other symptoms you'll get is that, for one, it'll be very rich running because you're breathing fuel into the engine through your intake manifold, so your air-fuel mixture is going to be completely off because the ability for the engine to meter the amount of fuel going in relies on it all going through the fuel system. system and not breathing it in through your intake manifold. These are the symptoms that happen when the rupturing of your diaphragm is significant, far beyond the point where I just had long cranking. So this video is mainly to show early signs of failure, right? But as to the troubleshooting techniques made by the very nice man in the video, fuel being at the individual solenoid valves going to your intake manifold, in the event that you have a significant amount of fuel at that port, the first thing you'd go to question is your pressure dampening vent valve, which is BMW's solenoid valve as it's listed in parts diagrams, but it has a better name for it in this document. Fuel would have to get past that damper vent valve and have to go through the solenoid valve itself before it gets to the plastic vent tube on the opposite side. And the other point to mention is that gasoline's boiling point is like minus 43. Meaning that gasoline is always in a state of vaporizing, so you'll always have fuel vapors. And those vapors can make their way anywhere through that system, so small amounts of fuel being noted on those solenoid valves, I would deem as normal. I will say I'm very appreciative for anybody who's willing to put out some information on these type of vehicles. There is a very limited amount of information on them, so anybody who's willing to lend a hand to help other people troubleshoot and diagnose their vehicles, I'm very appreciative of that. Unfortunately, there is a misconception with this particular video.
As for the results of our test yesterday, I think we can conclude that the diaphragms and our high pressure fuel pisms are intact and do not require replacements. Although it did not give us the answer that I was looking for, I do think the test that we did yesterday is a good indication of the health of your diaphragms and your high pressure fuel pumps, and it should work for you. As for how much leakage is supposed to come out of this line, I don't actually have a spec for that. So I'm just going to hope that it's good and I'll readdress it at a later date. Fact of the matter is, it's not getting pulled into our intake manifold as I assumed it was prior to me having an understanding of the system here. As to where I go from here, I'm starting to veer in the direction that I've been misled by the fuel in this line and stuff like that. And I'm going to redirect my attention to a code that's popped up here and there. Each time I clear it, it comes back every once in a while, but it's one for an exhaust cam position sensor on bank 1. I think I'm just going to bite the bullet and replace that and hope that solves my problems. And if my cam position sensor is out, then the ECM is confused as to the timing for injection, which could cause long cranking and stumbling at idle. So I'm going to get that part ordered from BMW, and I'll probably make another video doing it because once again, there's nothing for these cars on YouTube. So I'm going to provide as much as I can. With that, hopefully this helps if you're tackling a similar situation. But now that I've got everybody excited about the prospects of a low mileage V12 in this thing, there is still the elephant in the room of how bad is the structural damage on this thing. The answer to that is I don't actually know. Let's find out though. I've got glimpses from looking underneath the car as to exactly how bad it is, but I've never actually lifted it up, so we're gonna do that today. Yep, restraint system code is on. Not sure what that's about. It's quite the mess it's got going on. Doesn't like that my door's open. Oh, feel that mess. But I like that it lets me do it anyway. Oh, no, there's plenty of room. Oh, still too low to the ground. Fine, we won't use a creeper then. There, if you can see, is the first bit of damage to this car. This is the one I seen when I purchased the vehicle. Doesn't look incredibly terrible aside from all the rust because the paint's been damaged. It is folded over in this corner here. This skirt has a number of places where you can see that Bondo has been applied. Looks like there used to be a plastic cover throughout here, which is now gone. Probably very expensive, so I probably won't replace it. The second place where I've seen damage is back here, which is very much so the same idea. It's kind of just folded over right about there. Not as significant as the damage to the front. Aside from that, I don't see anything else going on this side. Something appears to be dripping there, but I believe that's the refrigeration unit for the fridge in the back seat. So I'm okay with that. This is where things can get expensive if there's damage down here. It appears we have engine leaks. Oh, quite a few actually. So I think this is our power steering pump, and we have had a bit of a power steering leak, but nothing is making puddles on the ground. This is fuel from yesterday. Oh, some of this may be fuel that's spilled as well. Overall, this just needs to be pressure washed so I can see exactly where all this is coming from. This is the dynamic control anti-sway bar, which appears that it may be sweating, but this could also be residual from elsewhere. As far as I know, the rear anti-sway bar is the one that's actually leaking, so I'll have to repair that one. May have to repair this one. Nothing I'm looking at here looks too scary, to be honest. Looks like the frame was also kind of crumpled here, actually, underneath the skirt. My goodness, what happened to this thing? How did they, like they completely hopped the curb with it or something like that? Looks like a little bit more rolled around here. Damage to the plastic. Despite how bad it may look, I assure you, this car drives perfect. On a highway, if you let go of the steering wheel, it'll slowly start to pull, but aside from that, like, key is just don't drive on the highway with no hands. I've driven this car, my brother's driven this car, my dad's driven this car, and nobody said they have had any issues with it pulling or driving in any strange way. This car drives very, very well. And I don't plan to put 200,000 kilometers on this thing. It's mainly just going to be like a summer driver, so the structural damage to this vehicle does not concern me. And I took extra precautions to make sure that this vehicle was not a write-off in any way, that this vehicle is safe to go on the road. We'll call it here for today, and I'll see you in another video.